Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at source material covering an event that really just shifts the entire geopolitical landscape overnight.
It really does.
We're talking about the sudden strikes on Venezuela and the confirmed capture of a sitting president, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife, Celia Flores.
And our sources show this fascinating split, this duality that we have to unpack.
What's that?
Well, on the one hand, you have the military operation itself. I mean, just an incredible display of efficiency and daring. It's a success by that metric.
But on the other hand,
On the other, that very success rips open all these profound questions about international law and, the political and economic future of Venezuela. It's swift action versus the long, agonizing aftermath.
right, we've compiled reports on everything, the timing of the strikes, the U.S. justification, the terrified reaction in Caracas, and the ripples it's sending from Moscow to Beijing. So our mission is to get to the heart of it. How does a seemingly successful military strike actually impact a nation that was already, for all intents and purposes, completely paralyzed by economic collapse?
Okay, let's get into it.
So the news breaks this morning. President Trump confirms it, a large-scale operation, and they have him. Maduro and Flores are out of the country.
And the speed of it just left the Venezuelan government reeling. I mean, completely in the dark.
The sources really highlight that. The vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, she's on record saying she had no idea where they were.
And she immediately demands proof of life from the U.S.
That phrase alone, proof of life, it just speaks volumes about the level of chaos and fear on the ground, doesn't it?
It speaks to just how unprecedented this whole thing is. And to get a sense of that panic, you have to look at how it was done.
Tell us about that.
The strike started at around 1 a.m. local time, multiple explosions rocking Caracas.
Not just a single strike.
No, not at all. They specifically targeted key installations. La Carlota Air Base was a major one. This wasn't some surgical drone hit. This was a coordinated military action meant to neutralize any resistance before the main event.
And the sources really drive home the psychological shock of it. They describe the blasts as utterly alien to life in Caracas.
Yeah, which makes sense. I mean, despite all its problems, the capital hadn't seen this kind of direct U.S. military action.
Yeah?
Ever, really.
So who carried it out?
Well, this was textbook special forces. The material confirms it was a U.S. Delta Force operation.
The elite of the elite.
Exactly. These are the same guys responsible for, getting high-profile targets like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. The CIA provided the intel, the tracking.
And that's what the sources mean when they call it startling and efficient.
Yes, they removed a sitting head of state from what should have been a fortress, and apparently with minimal U.S. casualties reported. That's the definition of a successful op.
Well, which brings us to the geopolitical weight of this. This isn't a raid on some remote compound. This was the physical removal of the president of a sovereign nation, a country the U.S. sees as that's the term they use, a regional irritant.
Right, which is just jargon for a state whose policies are, unacceptable to Washington, but don't pose a direct military threat.
So the military efficiency was there, but the political complexity just exploded.
Instantly. And the administration knew it had to have its legal justification ready to go.
So what is the official line?
The official U.S. frame for this is purely judicial, not military. Attorney General Pam Bondi has already confirmed that Maduro and Flores will soon face the full wrath of American justice.
Based on what?
On drug trafficking indictments. They were actually filed way back in 2020 in the Southern District of New York.
The SDNY. Why is that jurisdiction important?
SDNY is key because it has a long, aggressive history of prosecuting international organized crime. By framing it through an existing indictment, the administration tries to cast this whole thing not as an act of war.
But as an arrest.
A very elaborate, very high-stakes arrest, yeah. It also helps justify that $50 million bounty that was on Maduro's head. The legal hook is drug trafficking.
But the real goal is geopolitical.
Of course.
Because let's be honest, if it was just about drug charges, you don't need to launch a massive airstrike on a military base.
Exactly. The charges are the pretext. The sources are very clear that the ultimate U.S. policy objective here has always been regime change.
So what were the other reasons, the broader, non-judicial ones, the administration laid out for this?
Well, there are three main drivers you can piece together. First, like we said, curbing the flow of drugs. That's the official one.
Okay.
Second is about migration. The administration has explicitly stated they hope a future calm and prosperous Venezuela would mean the hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan migrants in the U.S. might actually go home.
Easing domestic pressure.
Well,
And the third,
the third is the elephant in the room. massive strategic influence over the world's largest proven oil reserves. It's not even about prices tomorrow. It's about long-term global energy security and, boxing out competitors like China or Russia from getting a foothold there.
So when you put all three of those together, drugs, migration, and energy, you start to see why they took such a huge risk.
Exactly. The motivation was a mix of domestic and global strategic concerns, deeply intertwined.
Let's talk about the legality of the strikes themselves, the bombs, the helicopters that protected the capture team. What was the legal mechanism for that use of force?
The president relied on his Article 2 authority.
As commander-in-chief.
Precisely. For listeners who don't follow this stuff closely, Article 2 of the Constitution lays out the president's executive powers. The argument here is that the strikes were necessary to protect U.S. personnel who were engaged in a lawful mission.
A lawful mission being the arrest warrant.
Right, so it's framed as self-defense for the operators, which allows the president to bypass needing explicit congressional approval for an act of war.
And it seems designed to be a one-off event.
It does. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, according to the sources, quickly told senators he anticipates no further action in Venezuela now that Maduro is in U.S. custody.
A crucial signal.
A very crucial signal. It tells everyone the military part of this is over. Capture, secure, get out. The problem now is entirely political and economic.
And there is a historical parallel here, isn't there?
A big one. The sources point out this happened almost exactly 35 years to the day since the U.S. arrested Manuel Noriega in Panama.
Also on drug charges.
Also on drug charges, and also requiring a military operation, a full-scale invasion in that case, to pull it off. It's clear the administration looked back at that long, somewhat mixed history of U.S. interventions and hoped to repeat the capture part.
While avoiding the messy nation-building part that usually follows.
Exactly.
And that really brings us to the hardest part of this whole deep dive. The sources are, frankly, extremely pessimistic about what comes next.
They are.
Once that exhilaration of removing an authoritarian fades, the really hard questions about Venezuela's survival have to be answered.
And we absolutely have to focus on the core issue that was there long before Maduro. We're talking about Venezuela's totally crippled economy.
This is the root cause.
It's the root of everything. Hyperinflation that makes the currency worthless. Chronic food shortages. The collapse of basic services. Electricity, water, hospitals. Maduro didn't cause all of that, but he became an authoritarian because of it. He needed force to stay in power.
And this military strike, as successful as it was, solved none of that.
None of it. Which means the political vacuum it created is incredibly dangerous.
The sources suggest the Venezuelan military was heavily hit in the strikes, so their command structure might be weakened.
It's fragmented at best.
So who steps in? Is there anyone who can unify the country?
That is the $50 million question, isn't it? The constitutional successor is Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, but what does she do now?
Does she cooperate?
Does she immediately seek détente with the U.S. to make sure she's not next on the list? Because if she doesn't, she's a target. The U.S. has created a power vacuum where only the most ruthless or the most desperate will dare to step forward.
And what about the international reaction? Moscow and Beijing had a lot invested in Maduro.
They did, and now they have to be looking at how their ally was just whisked away. It has to make them question the entire international order.
It sets a precedent.
A huge one.
Yeah.
It raises this essential question about the limits of national sovereignty. If a superpower can unilaterally extract the leader of another country, who's next? This is shockwave.
This really gets to the main critique in all the source material, I think.
It does.
The U.S. military is, as the sources say, very good at this sort of thing, removing leaders, bin Laden, Zawahiri, now Maduro. They've proven their tactical skill again and again.
What?
But, as the sources warn, they fail repeatedly in what comes next. The stabilization, the humanitarian plan, the long-term political strategy.
Which just reinforces the absolute need for that plan to exist. The U.S. has to approach the aftermath with the exact same efficiency, detail, and resolve that they used to plan its capture.
If they don't.
The fear is that Venezuela will simply be left to see further collapse. And that collapse means a humanitarian disaster that will destabilize the whole region. Uncontrollable refugee flows, criminal gangs filling the void.
So, wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've seen a stunningly successful, incredibly daring military options achieve its primary goal.
It did. They got their man.
And it fulfilled that promise of justice on the drug charges. But that very success just rips the door open to this massive, messy, and potentially catastrophic political crisis that was always simmering right under the surface.
And it leaves you with this one final thought. If the capture of a leader removes the symptom, but it doesn't touch the actual disease, that crippled economy, that deep political instability, then how long can the success of this operation really last? The raid was a powerful show of force, no doubt. But the ability to remove a player from the board is just not the same as the ability to run the game.
Or even set the rules for the new game.
Exactly. The real question is whether the U.S. commitment to rebuilding Venezuela is as swift and resolute as its commitment to capturing Maduro was. Because if it's not, the consequences could easily outweigh this tactical triumph.
A question that will define stability in that region